The second part of the lecture is going to be fairly short, but we're going to talk about three more researchers who contributed to kind of our understanding of how different processes happen the way they do. And the first man we're going to talk about, his name was James Hutton, and he was a Scottish geologist that proposed this idea of gradualism. So he kind of proposed that Earth's geologic features could be explained by gradual happenings or gradual mechanisms that currently operate in the world. So, for example, he suggested that rivers were formed by rivers that wear through rocks throughout time, which today we know that's true. He also suggested that fossils we find in sedimentary rocks are there because maybe particles were eroded from the land and were carried there from rivers to the sea and so on and so forth. So he just basically kind of proposed this idea that everything that's going on in the world is going on gradually. Now, Charles Lyell had kind of a different viewpoint of how different geologic processes happened. And he called this idea or this hypothesis uniformitarianism. But he was a geologist that developed the theory, and this theory states that the same geologic processes that are happening today were happening in the past, and that they happen at the same rate. So he kind of took the stance that, listen, this stuff has always been going on, it's always going to be occurring, so everything is pretty uniform. It's always occurring at the same rate, and it always will be. The third scientist we're going to talk about in this segment is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, and he was around from 1744 to 1829, but he was a French biologist that kind of was the first one to maybe suggest evolutionary change, and what he believed was that organisms or species changed throughout that fossil record or throughout those different rock strata because of the fact that they adapted to their environment. He also believed that evolutionary change happens because organisms have an innate drive to become more complex. So he might have suggested that humans are the most complex species because of the fact that they had this innate drive to reach the top. Now this is a picture of Lamarck, and I wanted you to take a look, just as an example, at the giraffes on the right-hand side of the screen. So the giraffe on the left, you notice, has a shorter neck, and he's eating from, let's say, a bush, a shorter piece of vegetation. So maybe that plant didn't taste as good, or maybe it didn't have as much nutritional value. So over time, giraffes stopped eating off of that plant. So that trait was kind of put aside. It was no longer used. But if you look on the right, you can see that, hey, that giraffe is trying to get leaves off of that tree. And maybe that tree is healthier. Maybe it tastes better. For whatever reason, it over time adapted to having to reach leaves that were higher up. So over time, you can see that the neck elongates, and this is an explanation for why giraffes have long necks.